We're going to do something light and talk about the Arahat. I'm going to start reading with Majjhima Nikaya 112, and it's called the Sixfold Purity, and it's translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Thus have I heard on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. There he addressed the bhikkhus thus. Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir, they replied. The Blessed One said this, Hear, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu makes a declaration of final knowledge thus. I understand, birth is destroyed. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being. That bhikkhu's words should neither be approved nor disapproved. Without approving or disapproving, a question should be put thus. Friend, there are four kinds of expression rightly proclaimed by the Blessed One, who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened. What for? One speaks of the seen as it was seen. One speaks of the heard as it was heard. One speaks of the sensed as it was sensed. One speaks of the cognized as it was cognized. These, friend, are the four kinds of expression rightly proclaimed by the Blessed One, who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened. How does the Venerable One know? How does he see regarding these four kinds of expression, so that through not clinging, his mind is liberated from the taints? Bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is one with taints destroyed, who has lived the holy life, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, reached the goal, destroyed the fetters of being, and is completely liberated through final knowledge, this is the natural way for him to answer. Friends, regarding the seen, I abide unattracted, unrepelled, independent, detached, free, disassociated, with a mind rid of barriers. Regarding the heard, regarding the sensed, regarding the cognized, I abide unattracted, unrepelled, independent, detached, free, disassociated, with a mind rid of barriers. It is by knowing thus, seeing thus, regarding these four kinds of expression, that through not clinging, my mind is liberated from the taints. Saying good, one may delight and rejoice in that bhikkhu's words. Having done so, a further question may be put thus. Friend, there are these five aggregates affected by clinging, rightly proclaimed by the Blessed One, who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened. What five? They are the material form aggregate affected by clinging, the feeling aggregate affected by clinging, the perception aggregate affected by clinging, the formations aggregate affected by clinging, and the consciousness aggregate affected by clinging. These, friend, are the five aggregates affected by clinging, rightly proclaimed by the Blessed One, who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened. How does the Venerable One know? How does he see regarding these five aggregates affected by clinging, so that through not clinging, his mind is liberated from the taints? Bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is one with taints destroyed and is completely liberated through final knowledge, this is the natural way for him to answer. Friend, having known material form to be feeble, fading away and comfortless, with the destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up and relinquishing of attraction and clinging regarding material form, of mental standpoints, adherences, and underlying tendencies regarding material form, I have understood that my mind is liberated. Friends, having known feeling, having known perception, having known formations, having known consciousness to be feeble, fading away and comfortless, with the destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up and relinquishing of attraction and clinging regarding the other four aggregates, of mental standpoints, adherences, and underlying tendencies regarding the other four aggregates, I have understood that my mind is liberated. It is by knowing thus, seeing thus, regarding these five aggregates affected by clinging, that through not clinging, my mind is liberated from the taints. Saying good, one may delight and rejoice in that bhikkhu's words. Having done so, a further question may be put thus. Friend, there are these 6 elements proclaimed, rightly proclaimed, by the Blessed One who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened. What 6? They are the earth element, the water element, the fire element, the air element, the space element, and the consciousness element. These, friends, are the 6 elements rightly proclaimed by the Blessed One who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened. How does the Venerable One know? How does he see regarding these 6 elements, so that through not clinging his mind is liberated from the taints? Bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is one with taints destroyed and is completely liberated through final knowledge, this is the natural way for him to answer. Friends, I have treated the earth element as not self, with no self based on the earth element, and with the destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up, and relinquishing of attraction and clinging based on the earth element, of mental standpoints, adherences, and underlying tendencies based on the earth element, I have understood that my mind is liberated. Friends, I have treated the water element, the fire element, the air element, the space element, the consciousness element as not self, with no self based on these other 5 elements, and with the destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up and relinquishing of attraction and clinging based on these other 5 elements, of mental standpoints, adherences, and underlying tendencies based on these other 5 elements, I have understood that my mind is liberated. It is by knowing thus, seeing thus, regarding these 6 elements, that through not clinging, my mind is liberated from the taints. Saying good, one may delight and rejoice in that bhikkhu's words. Having done so, a further question may be put thus. But friend, there are these 6 internal and external bases, rightly proclaimed by the Blessed One who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened. What 6? They are the eye and forms, the ear and sounds, the nose and odors, the tongue and flavors, the body and tangibles, the mind and mind objects. These, friend, are the 6 internal and external bases, rightly proclaimed by the Blessed One, who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened. How does the Venerable One know? How does he see regarding these 6 internal and external bases, so that through not clinging his mind is liberated from the taints? Bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is one with taints destroyed and is completely liberated through final knowledge, this is the natural way for him to answer. Friends, with the destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up and relinquishing of desire, lust, delight, craving, attraction, and clinging, and of mental standpoints, adherences, and underlying tendencies regarding the eye, forms, eye consciousness, and things cognizable by the mind through eye consciousness, I have understood that my mind is liberated. With the destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up and relinquishing of desire, lust, delight, craving, attraction, and clinging, and of mental standpoints, adherences, and underlying tendencies regarding the ear, sounds, ear consciousness, and things cognizable by the mind through ear consciousness, regarding the nose, odors, nose consciousness, and things cognizable by the mind through nose consciousness, regarding the tongue, flavors, tongue consciousness, and things cognizable by the mind through tongue consciousness, regarding the body, tangibles, body consciousness, and the things cognizable by the mind through body consciousness, regarding the mind, mind objects, mind consciousness, and things cognizable by the mind through mind consciousness. I have understood that my mind is liberated. It is by knowing thus, seeing thus, regarding these 6 internal and external bases, that through not clinging, my mind is liberated from the taints. Saying good, one may delight and rejoice in that bhikkhu's words. Having done so, a further question may be put thus. But, friend, how does the Venerable One know? How does he see, so that in regard to this body with its consciousness and all external signs, eye-making, mind-making, and the underlying tendency to conceit have been eradicated in him? Bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is one with taints destroyed and is completely liberated through final knowledge, this is the natural way for him to answer. Friends, formerly when I lived the home life, I was ignorant. Then the Tathagat, or his disciple, taught me the Dhamma. On hearing the Dhamma, I acquired faith in the Tathagat. Possessing that faith, I considered thus: household life is crowded and dusty. Life gone forth is wide open. It is not easy while living in a home to lead the holy life utterly perfect and pure as a polished shell. Suppose I shave off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. On a later occasion, abandoning a small or a large fortune, abandoning a small or a large circle of relations, I shaved off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and went forth from the home life into homelessness. Having thus gone forth and possessing the bhikkhu's training and way of life, I purified my mind from doubt. Having thus abandoned these 5 hindrances, imperfections of the mind that weaken wisdom, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, quite secluded from unwholesome states, I entered upon and abided in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. With the stilling of applied and sustained thought, I entered upon and abided in the second jhana. With the fading away as well of rapture, I entered upon and abided in the third jhana. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, I entered upon and abided in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. When my concentrated mind was thus purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfections, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to knowledge of the destruction of the taints. I directly knew as it actually is, this is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. I directly knew as it actually is, these are the taints. This is the origin of the taints. This is the cessation of the taints. This is the way leading to the cessation of the taints. When I knew and saw thus, my mind was liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from being, and from the taint of ignorance. When it was liberated, there came the knowledge, it is liberated. I directly knew birth is destroyed, The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being. It is by knowing thus, seeing thus, friends, that in regard to this body with its consciousness and all external signs, I-making, mind-making, and the underlying tendency to conceit have been eradicated in me. Saying good, bhikkhus, one may delight and rejoice in that bhikkhu's words. Having done so, one should say to him, it is a gain for us, friend. It is a great gain for us, friend, that we see such a companion in the holy life as the Venerable One. That is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. I want to continue reading, and I'm going to actually read one more sutta, which is the Bahiya Sutta, the discourse about Bahiya. And I'm reading from Sutta Central, the translation by Bhikkhu Ananda Jyoti. Thus have I heard, at one time the Blessed One was dwelling near Savatthi in Jeta's wood at Anathapindika's park. Then at that time Bahiya of the Barcloth was living near Suparaka on the bank of the ocean, being venerated, respected, revered, honored, esteemed in receipt of robes, alms food, dwellings, and medicinal requisites to help when sick. Then when Bahiya of the Barcloth had gone into hiding, into seclusion, this reflection arose in him. Among those in the world who are worthy ones and have entered the path to worthiness, I am one of them. Then a Deva, who was a former blood relative of Bahiya of the Barcloth, being compassionate and desiring his welfare, knowing with his mind the reflection in the mind of Bahiya of the Barcloth, went to Bahiya, and after going he said to him, you are certainly not a worthy one, Bahiya, nor have you entered the path to worthiness. This practice of yours is not one whereby you may be a worthy one, or one who has entered the path to worthiness. Then who now in this world with its devas and worthy ones, or have entered the path to worthiness? There is Bahiya in the northern countries a city by the name of Savatthi. There the Blessed One dwells at the present time, who is a worthy one, a perfect Sambuddha. He, Bahiya, the Blessed One, is certainly a worthy one, and teaches the Dhamma for attaining worthiness. Then Bahiya of the Barcloth, being greatly moved by the Devta, immediately went from Suparaka, and staying for only one night in every place, went to Savatthi and to Anathapindika's park. Then at that time, many monks were walking in meditation in the open air. Then Bahiya of the Barcloth went to one of those monks, and after going he said this to them, where, reverend sirs, is the gracious one living at present, the worthy one, the perfect Sambuddha? We have a desire to see him, the gracious one, the blessed one, the worthy one, the perfect Sambuddha. The Blessed One, Bahiya, has entered among the houses for alms. Then Bahiya, having hurriedly left Jeta's grove, and having entered Savatthi, saw the Blessed One walking for alms in Savatthi, confident, inspiring confidence, with sense faculties at peace, mind at peace, having attained supreme self-control and calm, controlled, guarded with restrained faculties, a true Naga. After seeing him, he went to the Blessed One, and after going and prostrating himself with his head at the Blessed One's feet, he said to the Blessed One, Let the Blessed One preach the Dhamma to me, Reverend Sir. Let the Fortunate One preach the Dhamma that will be for my benefit and happiness for a long time. After that was said, the Blessed One said to Bahiya of the bar cloth, It is the wrong time for you, Bahiya. We have entered among the houses for alms. For a second time, Bahiya said to the Blessed One, But it is hard to know, Reverend Sir, the dangers to the Blessed One's life, or the dangers to my life. Let the Blessed One speak and preach the Dhamma to me, Reverend Sir. Let the Fortunate One preach the Dhamma that will be on my benefit, that will be for my benefit and happiness for a long time. For a second time, the Blessed One said to Bahiya, It is a wrong time for you, Bahiya. We have entered among the houses for alms. For a third time, Bahiya said to the Blessed One, But it is hard to know, Reverend Sir, the dangers to the Blessed One's life, or the dangers to my life. Let the Blessed One preach the Dhamma to me, Reverend Sir. Let the Fortunate One preach the Dhamma that will be for my benefit and happiness for a long time. In that case, Bahiya, you should train yourself thus. In what is seen, there must only be what is seen. In what is heard, there must be only what is heard. In what is sensed, there must be only what is sensed. In what is cognized, there must be only what is cognized. This is the way, Bahiya, you should train yourself. And since for you, Bahiya, in what is seen, there will be only what is seen. In what is heard, there will only be what is heard. In what is sensed, there will be only what is sensed. In what is cognized, there will be only what is cognized. Therefore, Bahiya, you will not be with that. And since, Bahiya, you will not be with that, therefore, Bahiya, you will not be in that. And since, Bahiya, you will not be in that, therefore, Bahiya, you will not be here or hereafter or in between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. Then, through the Blessed One's brief teaching of this Dhamma, Bahiya of the bar cloth's mind was immediately free from the taints without attachment. Then the Blessed One, having advised Bahiya of the bar cloth with this brief advice, went away. Then not long after the Blessed One had gone, a cow with a young calf, having attacked Bahiya of the bar cloth, deprived him of life. Then the Blessed One, after walking for alms in Savatthi, while returning from the alms round after the meal, after going out from the city with many monks, saw that Bahiya of the bar cloth had died. After seeing him, he addressed to the monks, saying, Monks, take up Bahiya of the bar cloth's body, and after putting it on a pyre, carrying it away and burning it, make a memorial mound for him. Your fellow in the spiritual life, monks, has died. Yes, Reverend Sir, said those monks, and after replying to the Blessed One, putting Bahiya of the bar cloth's body on a pyre, carrying it away, burning it, and making a memorial mound for him, they went to the Blessed One, and after going and worshipping the Blessed One, they sat down on one side. While sat on one side, those monks said to this Blessed One, Burnt, Reverend Sir, is Bahiya of the bar cloth's body, and the memorial mound for him has been made. What is his destination? What is his future state? A wise man, monks, was Bahiya of the bar cloth, who practiced Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma, and did not trouble me on account of the Dhamma. Completely emancipated, monks, is Bahiya of the bar cloth. Then the Blessed One, having understood the significance of it, on that occasion uttered this exalted utterance. In the place where the water, earth, fire, and wind find no footing, there the stars do not shine, nor does the sun give light. There the moon does not glow, there darkness is not found. And when the sage, the Brahmana, has experienced Nibbana through his own sagacity, then from both form and formless happiness and suffering is he free. This exalted utterance was also said by the Blessed One, so have I heard. The mind of an Arahant is completely free from all concepts. When the Arahat experiences reality as it is, through the six sense bases, through consciousness, through feeling and perception, all of these processes are completely empty, completely void. They are empty of any conceit of I, me, or mine. And so when an Arahant experiences reality, there is no conceptual proliferation that arises from any perception that may arise from having experienced in that moment through the senses and the sense faculties. The consciousness of an Arahant, the awareness, while it may still be functional, is void of any sense of self. The perception of an Arahant, while it continues to perceive, is empty of any sense of self. The feeling aspect of an Arahat's mind, while it continues to feel the experiences felt, is void and empty of any sense of self. There is no projecting onto what is experienced any bundles of karma and activities or sense of personality that a mind not fully released may have an underlying tendency to do so. The mind of an Arahant cannot be traced. When the Arahant rests the mind within mind, the mind of that Arahant enters into a special state that is conscious cessation. It may be there while the Arahant walks, while the Arahat sleeps, while the Arahat talks, while the Arahat lies down, while they are sitting, while they appear to be in sitting meditation, or while they appear to be just vacant and idle, so to speak, not doing anything at all. The Arahat's mind is always tending towards the perception of cessation. The Arahat's mind takes the third noble truth of cessation as its object, as it were, and enters into Nibbana in the sense of having experienced or experiences that bliss that arises from Nibbana. But in that experience itself, there is no sense of a experiencer. There is no sense of any personal self that enters into these states of mind. And so when an Arahat meditates, or whenever an Arahat does anything at all, because there is no longer the fetter of conceit, there is no longer any comparison going on. There is no longer any subject or object duality going on in that sense. There is no sense that I am eating this food, or I am walking, or I am entering the first jhana, or the second jhana, and so on and so forth, all the way up to I am entering into the signless samadhi. I am entering into cessation of perception and feeling. I am entering into conscious cessation. I am entering into nibbana. That I am entering does not arise in the mind of an Arahant. It is pure intention, which is the intention without a personalizing sense of self. When an Arahant experiences the links of dependent origination, they are always tending towards the cessation of these links. It is that same experience that one has upon emerging from cessation of perception and feeling, in which the links arise, but the Arahat's mind is not bothered by the arising, nor is it glued to that arising or abides in that arising, but it continuously reflects on the cessation aspect of each arising of the links of dependent origination. And by doing so, understands that in the arising, in the abiding, as it were, in the cessation, and in the space between one cessation and the next arising, there is no sense of self. There is no self here or there. There is no abiding in this or that. All duality of perception and feeling in relation to a sense of self and the outside world is completely obliterated. The way the Arahat behaves and acts is always in accordance with the Eightfold Noble Path. And for conventional purposes, an Arahant would use the conventional languages of I, me, or mine just to be able to communicate and express with other beings. But in the usage of that language and in the usage of those words, there are no attachments of sense of self to them. The Arahat just sees reality as it is. The Arahat understands the elements just as they are. The Arahat understands the 5 aggregates just as they are, void of any clinging. The Arahat's mind is empty and remains empty because there is no abiding. And because there is no abiding, nothing sticks in the way of craving or through the fuel of craving and clinging and sense of self. The ignorance that the Arahat has destroyed is the ignorance of the 4 Noble Truths. The Arahat, in that sense, lives the 4 Noble Truths in every moment. Even while communicating, even while having a conversation, the Arahat's mind, although it may appear to be completely on the object of conversation or the object of meditation or any activity for that matter, the Arahat does not consider that object to be an object in the conventional sense of the word. There is meditation without an object. The Arahat does not have that sense that I am meditating, but that it is a process of meditation going on. And even that observation of that process of meditation is a series of causes and conditions, and therefore even that observation is empty of any sense of self. It is pure emptiness. And that pure emptiness is the pure emptiness of self, the pure emptiness of any craving. It is a mind void of craving, a mind without craving. In such a mind, there is no ability for projecting onto anything that appears with any of the fetters, and therefore there is no delusion. There is no filtration system through which whatever is perceived is filtered through the experiences that one attaches a sense of self to, through the memories that one has a sense of self to. Even the memories of an Arahant are completely void of a sense of self, in that the memories are stored within the mind insofar as that lifetime is concerned, and even the memories of previous lifetimes. If at that point the Arahat has what is the threefold knowledge, in that case, even those memories too are void and empty of any sense of self. They are memories that are pure in that they occurred and they are now in the memory bank, as it were, through the formations and the perception that recognizes those memories. But in the recognition of those memories, there is no recognizer. There is no sense of self in that recognition aspect. Just now I mentioned the threefold knowledge. The Arahant becomes an Arahant in that sense of the word becoming, in that they let go of all things, let go of all concepts, let go of all fetters, let go of all formations, let go of all craving and clinging and being. And through that letting go, and through that non-grasping, not clinging, not attaching, they destroy what are known as the taints, or the defilements, or what can be likened to the viruses or projections. And these are of three. Sometimes they are described as four, but they can be categorized into three. The four categories are the attachment to views, the defilement or projection of views in relation to a sense of self and other things in this reality. The other, but this can be recategorized into the sense of ignorance, in that destroying all views, you also destroy the ignorance. But before going to that, the other taint is the taint of sensual craving. Craving arises any time there is a mindset that says that I like this and I want more of it, or I don't like this, and therefore I don't want more of it and I want to avoid it, or personalizes it with a neutral sense of the feeling that arises. The Arahat can no longer crave because they destroy this projection of sensual craving. When they destroy this, they also destroy the link of craving from ever arising again. The projection or defilement of being is related to the craving for existence and non-existence, and therefore when this particular defilement or projection is destroyed, that, as well as the conceit of I, me, or mine, or relating a sense of self internally or externally, is also destroyed. And therefore the Arahat no longer relates to anything from a sense of self. Finally, the destruction of the taint or defilement or projection of ignorance means that one has destroyed the delusion that any of this is personal, and takes any of it to be permanent, to be long-lasting, to be happiness, and to be self. In other words, one has fully realized and experienced the three characteristics of existence, and continues to see all of reality in this manner. And therefore, such a mind is therefore able to continue to tend towards the cessation of being, the cessation of craving, the cessation of clinging, the cessation of feeling, the cessation of contact, and the cessation of the six sense bases. And this cessation does not only mean the cessation of perception and feeling, but also the cessation of relating a sense of self to any of this, which means even while being aware, there is no sense of an aware person in that awareness. Even while perceiving, there is no sense of perceiver. Even while feeling, there is no sense of a person feeling. Even while acting, there is no sense of a doer. Even while speaking, there is no sense of a speaker. It is all just an impersonal process arising from a series of causes and conditions. And so that is why the function of the mind of an Arahat is completely empty. That is why it is said in certain suttas that even the devas cannot trace the consciousness of an Arahat. Because while to, let's say, a scanning process of the mind and brain, if you were to hook up a Arahat to a brainwave scanner, besides the cessation of perception and feeling, in which there will be invariably no activity or very little, in depending upon the function and the ability of that brainwave scanner to be able to see how in depth the activity is arising or not. Aside from that, if one were to see the mind of an Arahat, it would appear to be quite normal. It would seem that there are certain functions that appear in the Arahat that would appear in the mind and consciousness of a being who has yet to be fully realized. But there is still a difference in that the Arahat does not project onto any aspect of the mind a sense of self. Because of that, because of no fuel for craving, because of the understanding of this, the Arahat's consciousness cannot be traced by the devas. The Arahat's consciousness cannot be understood or found out when the Arahat continues to tend towards conscious cessation. Because the Arahat's mind no longer abides anywhere. There is no concepts that arise, and any concepts that might arise or be utilized for the purposes of conventional conversation in way of teaching or understanding or providing teaching and understanding, even if those concepts are utilized, they are understood and seen to be as they are, which are empty fragments of consciousness that arise and pass away. Every aspect of the Arahat's mind is purified. And so even the 5 aggregates as they were, the destruction of clinging that is related to the destruction of the taints or projections are no longer present because of that destruction within the 5 aggregates. But even there is no sense of that these aggregates belong to the Arahat. They are still a series of processes and causes and conditions. So the idea that the clinging has been destroyed from the 5 aggregates is there in conventional terms, but for the Arahat, they don't even relate to the 5 aggregates in that same way either. Everything that arises is always tended towards ceasing, and therefore in that mind of the Arahat, they no longer abide in any of the 5 aggregates, in any of the links of dependent origination, in any aspect of consciousness. In that mind, as it is stated in the Bahiya Sutta, there is no concept of the 4 elements or the 6 elements that include space and consciousness. There are no concepts of this or that, here or there, the positive or negative, or any kind of concepts. And if they are present, they are only present for conventional purposes. But the way that the Arahat perceives them is to see through them, is to understand them with wisdom. The wisdom that arises in the Arahat or at Arahatship is the wisdom and understanding of how the links of dependent origination arise, are impermanent, are not worth holding on to, and therefore should be not considered as self, or should not be projected with a sense of self. That wisdom destroys all fetters. That wisdom eradicates and obliterates all of the taints. And therefore, when an Arahat talks and behaves, their automatic functioning is in route with the Eightfold Path. Because, as was stated earlier before, now that ignorance has been destroyed, only right view has been established, which is the complete understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And therefore, any functioning, any thinking, as it were, any speaking, any behavior from an Arahat is rooted in that right view. And because of that, they will only speak with right speech. They will only act with right action. And they will only think with the right intention or effective choice, which is to be able to relate to others from a sense of deep compassion and wisdom. If you were to boil down the entire path and the fruition of that path and the mind and functioning of an Arahat, it is these two: compassion for all beings and wisdom.
Excuse me. One concept that is sometimes arising in normal minds about the Arahat is the question around how does action come to be? In terms of, we see the links of dependent origination. We understand that ignorance has been destroyed. We understand there is no craving. And at the same time, we see in the 12 links of dependent origination, the birth of an action which is completely personalized in terms of I am doing this or that action. And then the question is, so in an Arahat's mind, as it terminates at feeling, how does an action come to be? And the action then would include the action, a bodily action, but also a verbal action in terms of normal communication.
Yeah. So in the case of an Arahat, they always respond from the effective choice or right intention. So whatever action an Arahat creates in that regard or takes in that regard is first and foremost a response from one of the four Brahma Viharas according to the situation that arises. An Arahat is quite pleased to be resting mind within mind without any activity going on. But if there is a request from external reality in the way of a person asking for help, asking for the Dhamma, or whatever it might be, even if they are practical considerations, the Arahat continues to act from right action without personalizing it. So, for example, one may ask an Arahat to possibly give a teaching on the Dhamma. The mind of an Arahat is already immersed in the Brahma Viharas. They have automated the mind in such a way that it responds from the Brahma Viharas. So upon listening to someone's sincere desire, in that sense, sincere chanda, wholesome desire, to want to know more about the Dhamma, they will then, out of that intention, from having heard from that person that they seek to know more about the Dhamma, that sound, let's go back into the links of different origination. That request, first and foremost, is in the form of a verbal request. So it is the sound that then enters into the auditory processes. That then activates the formations, that then activates a certain type of consciousness. So at the level of contact with that request on the audible level, on the auditory level, will activate the formations, which will go into action and activate the consciousness rooted then in the mentality materiality. And the intention that is then driven forward is the intention to teach the Dhamma as was requested. But in that intention, there is no relating or projecting into it a sense of self. It is all arising from what the situation demands or is requesting in this case. And then from there, the other formations in relation to verbalizing, which is to say the activity of thought, of mental perception and feeling, and then of verbal thought, come into play. But even in that activity, there is no sense of self, and whatever is arising in terms of the voice of the Arahat, who then starts talking about the Dhamma and starts teaching the Dhamma, in that entire process, there is no sense of, I am teaching the Dhamma. It is a full flow of the Dhamma through the conduit of this mentality and materiality, as it were. But in that process too, there is no personalizing with the sense of self. It is purely a response or reaction to what is being requested through a series of causes and conditions and processes, namely the links of dependent origination, from which then the Arahat speaks or acts. Now, the Arahat also has hunger. The Arahat also has thirst. And therefore, for the purposes of maintaining the body, the Arahat will seek food. But the Arahat, while there may be preferences that were established prior to full awakening, and while those preferences might still be there, does not project onto reality that these preferences need to be met. There is no sense of needs being met from a sense of self, but that the body requires sustenance through food and water and air, and for the purposes of sustenance, the Arahat will go seeking them. Once they are fulfilled, once they are content in terms of the body, in terms of the food for the body and the air and water for the body, the Arahat no longer requires any more sustenance for that day. So upon invitation for food, the Arahat will accept that invitation insofar as understanding that it provides the individual merit. But there is no projection from the Arahat's mind that I am entering into this person's house, I am eating their food, and therefore they are getting merit. It is through the compassion and understanding that this person wants to feed this body and therefore will allow it through that process by not projecting a sense of self. So anything that the Arahat does is really done from a process of compassion, from a standpoint, as it were, of compassion, but the mind does not relate to that compassion as a sense of self. It is just pure compassion that arises for the sake of relieving the suffering of that being, for the sake of providing wisdom in that being's mind. And once that is done, the Arahat leaves. There's nothing else to be done, and they will go back to their dwelling and sit happily within their mind.
So it does mean that an Arahat still has a pleasant feeling drinking a good coffee?
Yes, there will still be a pleasant feeling, but there won't be a sense of self to that pleasant feeling, because one understands that this coffee, for example, the mind or the body has been used to having coffee first thing in the morning, and so the body may enjoy in that regard having had that coffee, but in that enjoyment there is no delighting from a personal sense of view or sense of self. And if there is no coffee, the Arahat does not get cranky and say, "Where is my coffee?" The Arahat understands, well, there is no coffee, and therefore moves along, because there's no personal preferences here. There's no personalizing of any preferences. If there is food, all well and good. If there is no food, no problem. If there is water, all well and good. If there is no water, no problem. Or in modern day, if there is coffee, all well and good. If there is no coffee, no problem.
Reading the suttas, the reference to the Arahat is mostly made to bhikkhus, part of the Sangha. And there's actually little reference to lay Arahats. I mean, there is reference to lay individuals teaching people from the Sangha. There's multiple references, but very little reference to lay Arahats. So, and apparently it is possible for a lay Arahat to function in a lay community. Is that correct? Or
Yes, there is actually probably very little references, as you mentioned, about a lay Arahat, and probably not even mentioned at all. It might be mentioned not in the suttas, but it might be mentioned in the commentaries or later texts of individuals who may have become lay Arahats. But there is the understanding that if one were to become an Arahat while still a lay person, that they must then enter into the Sangha within 7 days, or they will expire. But one has to see, where is that really coming from? It's coming from the idea or the concept that the Arahat in that regard will not be able to sustain themselves from the lay perspective. Meaning the Arahat will not continue, if the Arahat was before an Arahat, a lay person, continue to do business, let's say, if that was their line of work, or continue to do anything in terms of earning money to sustain themselves. And so that is why the Arahat in that regard should enter into the Sangha, so that one may be in dependence, meaning dependent upon the generosity of other individuals. So the traditional understanding, therefore, is that if such an individual were to become an Arahat, that they would not be able to function in a lay society which expects such a being or person to function within that society. In other words, to have a mode of living, a livelihood, which will continue to sustain themselves. However, in the modern day, things have really changed from that perspective, in terms of an Arahat who might be there in modern days still be able to depend upon the generosity of others. So there is, of course, the purity of the Sangha in terms of the purity of the Sangha of monks. But in the mind of an Arahant, the concept of sustaining themselves doesn't arise. What usually will happen is, because of their nature of being generous themselves in terms of teaching and in whatever other selfless matters that there might be, it is inevitably reciprocated to the Arahat. Because whether a being knows that person is an Arahat or not, because the Arahat is so generous, because they are so kind-hearted, because they stem from the Brahmaviharas, it evokes in the other being the same kind of compassion and generosity. And therefore, whether they know the being is an Arahat or not, the giver, the generous one, from that heart wants to provide that Arahat a sustenance and a way of living in this world, whether they know it or not that that person is an Arahat.
That generates a follow-up question. Is that also the reason why giving to an Arahat or giving to a noble one, to put it in a broader perspective, is actually providing merit for the reason that one wants to give, one has a generous, an authentic intention, if you will, to provide food or other requisites to an Arahat?
Yes, well, if it's an Arahat or a noble one, let's say it's a monk or whoever it might be who is considered to be a noble one, if they have the inclination and, as you said, the authentic intention to provide clothing, food, shelter, whatever resources may be required for their daily sustenance, the merit that is produced by that being arises because of their innate generosity, because of their selfless generosity. The practice of generosity without looking for anything in return, but for the sake of being generous, for the sake of the other being, Arahat or not, cultivates in that person a mindset that is calm and collected naturally. And so in such a state of mind, it is easy for a being who is generous with that authentic intention, as you put it, to be able to come into meditation and enter the jhanas quite easily and quickly.
In the sutta that has been read today, there is the notion of someone entering Arahatship after listening to a short discourse by the Buddha, a short teaching by the Buddha. And at the same time, there is the notion that one needs to practice, go to the jhanas, and experience cessation for a number of times in order to purify the mind and to remove the fetters. So it seems that both are possible in terms of getting to Arahantship.
Yeah, I will give one more example actually in the case of Sariputta. There are two versions of Sariputta's enlightenment, as it were, full enlightenment. There is the one we know from Majjhima Nikaya 111, Anupada Sutta, in which he is going through each of the jhanas and then upon emerging from cessation has wisdom. But there is another sutta, and I don't know the name of it, but it is in the Majjhima Nikaya as well, in which Sariputta is fanning the Buddha. And his nephew comes, it's his nephew or his cousin, depending upon the tradition of understanding, who comes to the Buddha for knowledge and wisdom. And the Buddha gives him a discourse on feeling. And upon listening to this discourse, Sariputta, by not grasping and understanding the link of feeling in relation to the links of dependent origination, this is the deeper understanding of the sutta, lets go and destroys the fetters and taints. So, aside from that, what one needs to understand is when you come to a state of mind which is so purified, the whole purpose of jhana practice is to continue to be in that collected state of mind. And of course, you rarefy the mind, meaning you clarify the mind to such an extent, all the way to the level of the 8th jhana, and then finally at cessation, perception, and feeling, that because there is no abiding of any formations within that mind upon emerging, that when the formations do arise, there is just a pure seeing without a sense of self as it flows out, as the links of dependent origination flow out, that there is a relief. And in the case of some individuals, there is a complete dropping of all the fetters in which they attain arahatship. It is not always completely divided in this way as per the suttas. There are beings, for example, Kandonya, the one of the first 5 disciples of the Buddha, who upon just listening to the elaboration of the 4 Noble Truths, and then listening on the concept and understanding of anatta, of not self, dropped all the fetters, dropped all the taints or defilements or projections, and attained arahatship. So in such a mind, there has been this merit, if you will, that has been collected through countless lifetimes of having refined mind through various meditative attainments, from the 1st to the 8th jhana, and then coming to the Buddha's discourse, coming to the Buddha's dispensation, understanding what is the correct jhana or correct state of mind to be in, to create or to till, if you will, the soil of the mind, so that these seeds of insights can be planted, and then that full wisdom grows. Upon hearing it, just upon hearing it, there is the dropping of all fetters. Because even in the case of Sariputta, even in the case of Kandonya, even in the case of Bahiya, who is the person of the subject of the 2nd sutta, when they actually heard this discourse, their mind reflected upon it and had a retrospective mind, if you will, a retrospective looking into mind, and seeing the next arising of the links of dependent origination, and in seeing that at the level of feeling, letting go, that they attained arahatship. So whether it is listening to the Dhamma, having had such a rarefied mind, or going through the process of the jhanas and therefore purifying and clarifying the mind, so that upon seeing the links of dependent origination, the mind just drops the fetters, it's one and the same process in terms of the fruit of that practice.
Last question. There seemed to be, in the time of the Buddha, a lot of arahats in terms of individuals attaining arahatship. And at the same time, if we look in the existing days, there's a very limited amount of arahats. So, and if you read some of the commentaries, there's even statements around the different stages after the Buddha's parinibbana in terms of the potential level of attainment. Is there any reflections in terms of how this is moving forward, because I would argue we live actually in a pretty good time in terms of supporting the Buddha's dispensation, making it available, and using the early Buddha's teachings to come to the same level of knowledge.
Yeah. There are certain commentaries which talk about this in relation to whether it's going to be 500 years after the Buddha's demise or 5,000, whatever it might be. And that certain arahats with the fourfold analytical knowledges, which is in relation to how a arahat is able to convey the Dhamma through language and understanding and the thinking process. And then the arahats that are void of any of the, let's say, the higher powers or the psychic powers. And I just want to take one aside from this to say this, that the entry into arahatship is first and foremost and only the destruction of the defilements, the destruction of the taints. The threefold knowledge, which is the knowledge of one's past lives, and then the knowledge of the arising and passing away of beings, and hence the knowledge of how karma works in that regard through rebirth, is just the icing on the cake or the cherry on the top. One has to always see that the meaning of entering into arahatship is the destruction of the taints of sensual craving, the destruction of the taint of being, and the destruction of the taint of ignorance. So, yes, it seems that in today's reality and today's world, there is actually a growing interest in the Buddha's dispensation. And there is a growing number of individuals who are actually more and more interested in finding out about the original teachings, as it were, of the Buddha through the suttas and other texts of the Pali Canon. But it seems that the reason that there might not be so many arahats is because of misinterpretations of the suttas in some regard, misinterpretations of the texts, and also that because of today's world that we live in as compared to the time of the Buddha, there is overstimulation of the senses to such a high degree that if an individual from the Buddha's time were to somehow travel forward into today's century, they would go crazy in terms of the amount of sounds of different kinds of music, the visual forms in the different kinds of media and entertainment, the different kind of culinary feasts that are available through the fusions of different cultural foods and ingredients, and so on and so forth, that it would be overwhelming to their mind. So we have come at this point in this planet's evolution, as it were, where there is an overwhelming of the senses already, and this translates through to stress and to agitation of the mind. And so that is why it is recommended that one takes, let's say, a more personal retreat into the forest with the guidance of one who understands and knows, and subsists on alms in that regard, and allows the senses not to be bombarded by all of this activity, so that one can continue to practice without interference and disturbance. So in that regard, there are the possibilities of an arahat arising if such a practice were to be undertaken. And more than that, it is the ability to continually keep one's precepts. And what that is referred to is, in such a society, in such a global society that one lives in, for example, alcohol is free flowing wherever you almost go. And the idea that you don't drink alcohol at a function or an event or a party is rare. In fact, it is the norm that you drink at a party, for example. And the use of language has become so coarse. The other precepts that are related to the hindrances are not always followed through. There's always some level of compromise that arises or occurs, or disturbance then therefore that arises. So the idea of maintaining the precepts as well is a large part of delivering one's mind to arahatship. So if such a being were to arise, one, they have obviously had a lot of merit through countless lives, have had the inclination towards the Buddha's dispensation, and has developed the meditative attainments, whether in this life or previous lives, and then come to the dispensation of the Buddha in whatever current life they may be in, then understanding and being able to see what is through their intuition, right and wrong, investigating and understanding, keeping their precepts in this lifetime, and then going into meditative practices as ascribed in the suttas and through right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness as we understand it through the twin process. It is possible for such a being to attain arahatship.
May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisitions of all kinds of happiness. May being inhabiting space and earth, Devas and Nagas of mighty power share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.